Hello, my name is Rachel Carter, and for most of my life, I was told I'd never measure up to my sister. Every achievement of mine was dismissed, every sacrifice invisible, while Lauren's success was paraded like a crown. But the truth has a way of forcing its way to the surface, and the moment came when I could no longer stay silent. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. I grew up in a house where perfection had a name and it wasn't mine. That line has lived in my chest for as long as I can remember. Even as a child, I knew the hierarchy of our household. On one side was Lauren, my sister, the prodigy, the golden girl, whose every achievement seemed to sparkle under the glow of my mother's unending praise. On the other side was me, Rachel, the one with the small wins that no one ever bothered to frame. I remember standing in our living room in suburban Ohio, staring up at the mantel. The walls were a gallery of Lauren's triumphs, certificates, trophies, glossy photos of her winning debate championships, and newspaper clippings that announced her academic scholarships. Somewhere tucked in the corner, half covered by a larger frame, was my photo from the county art fair, where I had won first prize for an oil painting. My mother had glanced at that ribbon once and dismissed it as a hobby, telling me Lauren's internship at a law firm would look far better on college applications. Those words stung, but they were only the beginning. Growing up, every step I took seemed to follow in Lauren's perfectly placed footprints. When she made varsity captain, I barely scraped onto JV. When she juggled calculus and student council, I struggled through algebra. At every parent-teacher conference, I heard my name paired with hers in a comparison I could never win. Mom nodded as teachers said I was sweet but lacked drive, then filled the car ride home with lectures about applying myself more, always holding up Lauren as the standard. Time didn't soften the edges. It sharpened them. Years rolled forward and Lauren left for Harvard Law, the family celebrating as if royalty had been crowned. I watched her depart with suitcases full of promise while I quietly enrolled in community college for graphic design. Mom sighed at my acceptance letter, muttering that at least I was continuing my education. She never hid her disappointment. But I found comfort in art. Colors, textures, lines, they responded to me in a way my mother never did. My professors praised my work clients from local businesses, admired my designs, but at home it was always reduced to Rachel's little art job. Those words clung to me like a brand erasing the hours of labor behind every project, stripping my career of dignity. Lauren, meanwhile, soared. She became the young associate at a prestigious law firm, her name etched onto business cards that carried 3 times my annual salary. When she introduced Andrew, her fiancé, a cardiac surgeon with polished shoes and a BMW, Mom lit up as though she'd won the lottery. At every neighborhood barbecue, she recited Lauren's accolades, then glanced at me with a soft, perfunctory add-on, "Rachel does design work for local shops." I stopped expecting recognition. I learned to hide my frustration behind polite smiles, to let Dad's gentle pats on my shoulder be enough. Dad at least saw me. He was quiet, maybe too quiet, but he had a way of letting me know he noticed when I stayed up late at my desk sketching logos, or when I sacrificed weekends for clients. Still, his voice was always drowned out by Mom's endless hymns to Lauren's perfection. One night, it reached me in a way that shook something deep inside. Mom had put Lauren on speakerphone, her voice echoing proudly through the kitchen as I washed dishes. Lauren was sharing another victory, something about making fast track at her firm, and Mom, without hesitation, declared, "She's always been our pride." The words cut sharper than usual, as if they were meant to remind me of my permanent position in the shadows. I froze at the sink. My hands wet my chest, tightening. I didn't say anything because I never did. I just stood there listening to the celebration of a daughter who wasn't me. And then the night shifted in a way none of us expected. Dad, who had been sitting quietly in his recliner, suddenly lurched forward, his face draining of color. The glass of water he held slipped and shattered on the floor. Before I could move, he collapsed, his body heavy and unresponsive. Thomas' mom screamed, her voice shrill with panic. I dropped the dish, rushing to his side, my heart hammering against my ribs. His breathing was shallow, uneven. I pressed my hand against his chest, desperate to feel the rise and fall, desperate for any sign of stability. The room erupted in chaos. Mom fumbling for the phone, Lauren's voice still tinny on the speaker, asking what was happening. My own voice broke as I shouted for help. Seconds stretched into eternity until the sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer, swallowing our panic. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. Paramedics stormed in their commands, sharp and urgent, their hands practiced as they lifted my father onto the stretcher. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. I stood back trembling, watching as the only person who had ever quietly validated me was carried out under the harsh glow of ambulance lights. The sirens wailed a haunting scream tearing through the quiet suburban street, and I knew nothing about our family would ever be the same again. Spring in Cleveland felt heavy that year, not because of the weather, but because of the endless bills piling up on my kitchen table. I had spreadsheets open, invoices stacked beside me, and the hum of my old laptop filling the silence of my tiny apartment. Lauren was out there trying on wedding dresses, planning floral arrangements, and securing a venue that could host 300 guests. I was running numbers to make sure my parents wouldn't lose electricity before the end of the month. My father's illness had stretched longer than we hoped. Every visit to the hospital drained him a little more, and each new bill arrived like a silent accusation, reminding us that recovery cost more than love could cover. Mom, of course, shielded Lauren from all of it. She put on a smile, told my sister that Dad was stable, and spoke glowingly about the wedding preparations. I was the only one who saw the raw fear in her. At work, my days blurred. I took on every freelance job that came my way. Logo designs for restaurants, marketing flyers for local nonprofits, website layouts for small businesses that couldn't afford big agencies. 12 hours bled into 14, my eyes raw from staring at screens. My apartment became less of a home and more of a workstation, coffee mugs stacked beside sketches and sticky notes covering the walls with reminders of deadlines. It was Emily who noticed how close I was to breaking. She came by one evening with takeout and sat across from me while I scrolled through invoices. "Rach, you've got to scan every single receipt," she said, firmly sliding the noodles toward me. "Every hospital payment, every utility bill you're covering, even the groceries. Keep a record. One day you'll need proof of everything you've done." I laughed bitterly, half from exhaustion. Proof for who Mom doesn't want to see it. And Lauren, she has no idea this is happening. Emily leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "All the more reason. If they refuse to acknowledge it now, make sure they can't ignore it later." Her words lodged in my chest. That night after she left, I pulled out every folder I had and started scanning. One by one, receipts flickered across the scanner's light, their black ink whispering the story no one cared to read. Rachel paid the mortgage. Rachel covered the medications. Rachel kept the lights on. A week later, I stood in my parents' living room, another envelope in my hand. Inside was the mortgage payment, half of my monthly income disappearing with a single check. Mom accepted it absently, as though the money came from nowhere. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, not looking me in the eye. "These little projects of yours? They're not exactly reliable. What happens when they dry up?" Heat surged through me. "They're not little projects, Mom. They're my career. And right now, they're what's keeping this house from collapsing." She pursed her lips, her attention already sliding elsewhere. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she answered it with the kind of joy I hadn't seen from her in months. It was Lauren, of course. I listened as Mom's voice brightened, her whole demeanor changing as she announced into the receiver. "Darling, that's incredible. The firm chose you for the partner fast-track program. I knew you'd be the youngest to ever do it. We're so proud of you." The words pierced me deeper than any criticism. Moments before, I had shared that I'd landed my largest contract, yet a regional restaurant chain trusting me with a full rebranding. It was the kind of project that could launch my freelance business to the next level. Mom had barely nodded, yet Lauren's promotion drew tears of joy. I stood there, envelope still warm in her hands, realizing that no amount of sacrifice would ever measure up in her eyes. Later that night, back in my apartment, I stared at the growing folder of scanned documents. Each file was another fragment of myself poured into saving a family that refused to see me. Emily's voice echoed. "One day you'll need proof." My exhaustion pressed down like a weight, but beneath it, something harder formed. A resolve. If they couldn't recognize my value now, I would make sure the day came when they had no choice. The chandeliers sparkled that night, but all I felt was invisible. Summer had wrapped our backyard in warmth, cicadas humming somewhere beyond the fences, while rented chandeliers dangled above the tables like glowing jewels. The party Margaret had dreamed of was finally here. Linen-draped tables, crystal glasses filled with wine violins threading soft music into the air. Guests marveled at the transformation of the Carter home, and everyone spoke of Lauren and Andrew as though they were royalty. I had been there since morning, hauling chairs, arranging flowers, double-checking lights. My hands still smelled faintly of roses, though no one noticed. When the first guests arrived, I slipped quietly to the side, trading my role from worker to ghost. My heart ached not from the labor, but from knowing that much of the catering bill, the one that made the evening so elegant, had been paid with money I earned through sleepless nights. Margaret glided among the crowd, her smile polished her voice, carrying pride like perfume. "Isn't Lauren radiant?" she told anyone who asked, gesturing toward her eldest, who sparkled in a designer dress. Andrew stood at her side, tall, confident, recounting stories of his latest surgical triumphs. Together, they looked untouchable, bathed in the glow of admiration. I hovered at the edge, arranging cutlery one last time before withdrawing. The laughter of relatives swelled as champagne corks popped. I poured myself a small glass of water and stayed near the serving tables, half hidden behind a curtain of fairy lights. It was safer there, away from the spotlight that had never once turned my way. Voices carried across the lawn. "You must be so proud, Margaret," an elderly neighbor said, raising her glass. "Lauren has everything, a career, a fiancé, such a future ahead." Margaret's eyes gleamed. "Yes," she said warmly. "She's our pride. She always has been." And then the inevitable question, "And how is Rachel doing these days?" The pause lasted only a second, but it stretched like a knife drawn slow. My mother's voice softened, dismissive. "Rachel is still exploring her creative projects. Little art things here and there." A ripple of polite laughter circled the group, gentle but suffocating. Their eyes flicked toward me, some sympathetic, others pitying, all carrying the same judgment. I felt stripped bare, my sacrifices invisible beneath the lace tablecloths I'd ironed that morning. My pulse thudded in my ears. I thought of the checks I'd written, the late nights spent earning enough to cover hospital bills and mortgages, the catering invoice folded neatly in my folder of receipts. And here I was, reduced to a girl with little art projects. The conversations moved on, back to Lauren's future, back to Andrew's brilliance. Glasses clinked, the chandeliers glittered, and for everyone else, it was a perfect night. For me, it was humiliation wrapped in fairy lights. I excused myself from the crowd, walking to the edge of the yard. From there, I could see the whole party, my mother radiant, my sister glowing, neighbors clapping, relatives laughing. The music swelled, laughter echoed, and I felt the weight of every invisible sacrifice pressing down on me. It struck me then that this wasn't just a party. It was something sharper, colder. It was a rehearsal. Rachel stood beneath the electric glow, thinking, "This isn't just a party. It's a rehearsal for my erasure. Sometimes a single sentence can split your world in half, and my mother had just said it." The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. Bills were scattered across the counter, their red stamps screaming louder than any words. A bridal magazine lay open on the table, its glossy pages showing perfect white gowns and flower arrangements for a spring wedding that would cost more than my annual income. I stood there holding an envelope, the weight of another mortgage payment heavy in my hand, while my mother barely looked up. She took the envelope with casual fingers, slipping it beneath the pile of bills as though it were pocket change. "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" she asked, her tone flat, distracted. "Freelance work can't last forever. Those little projects of yours, they're not stable." I felt the burn in my chest, but I said nothing at first. Dad sat in his chair nearby, his face pale from months of recovery, his silence familiar. He watched, but his strength had been stolen by illness, leaving only weary eyes and a presence that could no longer intervene. Mom flipped another page of the magazine, sighing dreamily. "Lauren never has to worry about things like this. She's already on the partner track, engaged to a surgeon. She's built her life the right way. You..." Her gaze slid toward me, sharp as glass. "You'll never be as good as your sister. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can find contentment with less." Her words sliced through me with surgical precision. They carried every dismissal, every comparison, every silent wound I had swallowed over 28 years. For a moment, the room blurred. Then something inside me shifted cold and steady like steel hardening in fire. I placed the envelope squarely on the table. My voice came out calm, each word deliberate. Then ask her to pay your bills. The magazine slipped from her hands. She blinked, caught off guard, the smug certainty dissolving from her face. What did you just say? You heard me. My tone didn't waver. Ask your perfect daughter to cover the mortgage. Ask her to pay Dad's medical expenses. Ask her to handle the utilities, the car payments, the catering you insisted on for her engagement party. Every bill you've handed me for months, ask her to pay them. Silence dropped into the room, heavy as stone. Dad's eyes widened, a flicker of something relief, grief, pride passing across his tired face. Mom's lips opened and closed, searching for an answer, but none came. I leaned closer, my words sharper now, every syllable honed from sleepless nights and unacknowledged sacrifice. Do you think this money appears out of nowhere? Do you think these checks come from thin air? They come from me. From 14-hour days, from clients who pay late, from savings I no longer have. While you've been bragging about Lauren's success, I've been keeping this house standing. Her face drained of color. She tried to look away, but I wouldn't let her. My hands trembled not with weakness, but with the force of finally telling the truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder thick with paper. Do you want to see the proof? I asked, my voice quiet but edged with fire. Because I've kept every receipt. Every single one. The folder hit the table with a dull thud, and for the first time, my mother looked small. I placed the envelope on the table, my phone sliding out of my pocket. Do you want me to show you every receipt? Because I've kept them all. In the suffocating silence, every receipt became my weapon. The dining room glowed with warm light, crystal glasses clinking softly, the scent of roasted turkey filling the air. Snow tapped gently against the windows, winter pressing close outside. Around the long oak table, family members gathered, cheerful voices layered with expectation. It was supposed to be a holiday dinner another evening where Margaret Carter paraded her pride for Lauren while I lingered in the shadows. But tonight was different. Tonight I carried proof. I felt the folder heavy on my lap beneath the table. Emily's voice echoing in my mind. Keep every receipt. I had. Every bill, every transfer, every sacrifice, all pressed into paper that finally gave weight to what my words alone never could. The meal began with the usual chorus of compliments. Margaret raised her glass to Lauren and Andrew reciting Lauren's newest accomplishment at the firm as though it were scripture. Relatives clapped politely, their eyes shining. No one mentioned my name, not until Aunt Marjorie leaned forward and asked lightly, "And how's Rachel's little art business going?" The table chuckled with shallow politeness, and Margaret's lips curved with that familiar condescension. She's keeping busy with her small projects, of course. But nothing like the stability Lauren has built. My fingers tightened on the folder. The humiliation of the engagement party burned fresh in me, the dismissal like an echo I could no longer tolerate. I set the folder on the table with a decisive thud. The laughter died instantly. You want to talk about stability? My voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. Let's talk about reality. I opened the folder and slid out the first stack. Mortgage, April. Paid. The paper slid across the polished wood. May utilities. Paid. June prescription medication. Paid. Hospital copays. Paid. Catering for the engagement party everyone enjoyed so much I let the invoice land squarely in front of my mother. Paid. Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's face went pale, her lips trembling. I didn't realize. No, I said coldly, meeting her eyes. You didn't want to realize. It was easier to call me a failure than admit I was the one holding this family together. My sister's fork clattered against her plate. Lauren's eyes widened, darting between the papers and our mother. You paid for all of this? All those months? And Mom never told me. Margaret reached for words, but nothing came except stammering fragments. I thought Lauren had so much on her plate. I didn't want to burden her. I leaned forward the table, shrinking to silence. If Lauren is your pride, then let her shoulder the cost of that pride. I will not keep sacrificing while you erase me. The room pulsed with tension. My father, weak but steady, cleared his throat. His voice trembled, yet carried truth like stone. She's right. Rachel kept us alive when I couldn't. It was her Margaret, not Lauren. The weight of his words cracked something open. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, the polite facade crumbling. Eyes that once skimmed over me now locked in recognition. I gathered the last of the receipts into a neat pile. This ends tonight. No more pretending. No more invisibility. I am done funding a family that calls me worthless. Silence pressed in thick, suffocating. Then slowly a hand reached across the divide. Lauren's hand. She placed it firmly on my shoulder, her voice breaking but resolute. From now on, I'll handle it. You shouldn't carry this alone. The table went utterly still, as though the entire house had drawn a single breath and held it. This Thanksgiving, I walked into my parents' house not as a shadow, but as someone finally seen. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of roasted turkey, sage, stuffing, and sweet cranberry sauce. Outside, Ohio's late November chill had stripped the trees bare, but in the Carter dining room, the table gleamed with polished silver and flickering candles. For the first time in years, I stepped across the threshold without shrinking. My shoulders were back, my steps steady. I was no longer arriving as the invisible daughter. Margaret had gone out of her way, there was no denying it. On the table next to the centerpiece of autumn leaves sat my favorite dish, roasted butternut squash with maple glaze, something she had never once prepared before. She met my eyes briefly, almost shyly, and for a fleeting moment I saw regret softened by effort. Lauren and Andrew greeted me warmly without the careless grandeur that used to sting. Andrew pulled out a chair for me with quiet courtesy while Lauren smiled a smile that felt different, less dazzling, more genuine. Dad, healthier than I had seen him in months, raised a glass of apple cider in greeting. His cheeks carried color again, and his eyes sparkled with something like pride. Beside me sat David Miller, his hand resting gently over mine. A teacher with a quiet humor and kindness that steadied me, he fit into the picture seamlessly. He laughed with Dad about books, spoke with Lauren about schools in Boston, and every so often glanced at me with a pride that warmed more than the fire in the hearth. Dinner unfolded without the sharp edges of old comparisons. The conversation flowed like a river free of rocks, weaving from work stories to family jokes. Then Uncle Harold cleared his throat, leaning forward with his wine glass. So he asked with a grin, "How are the Carter girls doing these days?" Once that question would have been a knife. Tonight, Margaret answered differently. She looked around the table, then said, voice steady but tender, "Lauren is thriving at her firm, of course. But Rachel just landed a major design contract with a regional company. I'm proud of both of them for different reasons." The room hushed not from scandal, but from surprise. My mother, who had spent decades measuring me against Lauren, now spoke my name with pride. Something shifted in that moment, an old wound closing, or maybe just finally beginning to heal. Lauren lifted her glass, her eyes glistening. To Rachel, she said, voice breaking slightly, "The strongest among us, more than we ever realized." Glasses clinked, even Dad's hand trembling slightly as he raised his. David pressed his shoulder to mine, whispering, "About time they saw what I've always seen." I smiled, the warmth of the room flooding through me. This wasn't victory in the sense of triumph over enemies. It was something deeper, recognition, long denied, finally granted. I had fought not to be better than Lauren, but simply to be seen for who I was. And tonight I was. The clatter of silverware faded into laughter, the kind that reached the eyes. For the first time, Thanksgiving wasn't a stage for comparisons. It was a table where I belonged. There had once been a day when my mother said I would never be as good as my sister. Now she regretted it, and I at last believed her. The Carter family's story closed not with applause for perfection, but with recognition of the daughter who had carried them when no one else would. Justice came late, but it landed like a hammer, reshaping bonds and forcing truth into the light. When injustice is met with courage, the tide always turns, reminding us that silence only feeds cruelty, while one act of defiance can rewrite an entire legacy. No wall of lies can stand forever against the weight of truth. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Type 1 if you felt the same.